few days. It is now trading less than 1% lower at the moment, something we've been keeping an eye on. I spoke to Thomas Hubbard, the former US ambassador to South Korea, and he gave me a sense of what this political crisis is doing to the country.
I don't think there's going to be a huge impact on business and investors. I think we're seeing a very short-term episode of political drama that will be resolved over the next few weeks, certainly the next few months. And in some way, I think we should take heart that the democratic processes in South Korea worked. The president, and in my view, very unwisely, decided to declare martial law to deal with a political impasse between the two parties. And there is a reality in South Korea that of a very divided public, a very sort of fragmented political, not fragmented, but a very divided political scene in which parties have been alternating in power. They've been alternating in their control of the assembly and the presidency. Now we have in an unusual situation in which a Korean president would have been may still be the only Korean president to serve only with an opposition in control of the parliament. And there have been confrontations and certainly there are frictions, but I think they're going to work their way through it. It seems to me the most likely right now they're entering into an impeachment process with the opposition pushing for impeachment. I just learned from you that the government party seems to be resisting that, but in some fashion they're going to work through this impeachment process. At some point, have another election, and the democracy will live on. And I think one of the things I take heart from is realizing that the current prime minister of South Korea, who is the appointed by President Yoon, is a very stable man, a very steady hand on the process, a long time senior civil servant in Korea, former ambassador to the United States, and I feel very confident that he will manage this process better than almost anyone else could.
Now, we are also keeping a close eye on the Korean won. We've got to keeping that in our focus as well. It's reversed much of the losses on Wednesday after plunging the night before as a result of that declaration of martial law. And the Bank of Korea has also stepped in to stabilize markets. Expert Vishnu Varathan gave me a sense of the central bank's plans.
Bank of Korea has really stepped up. I think the very prompt response from them to be the liquidity provider of last resort has helped to shore up markets. So whilst we recognize the knee-jerk drop in the Korean won and in the Korean markets when the martial law invocation came through, what we don't appreciate enough is that the downside could have been far greater. So the BOK will continue to play that role, very dynamically and judiciously. So that will help to shore up some of the confidence, but at the same time, the BOK finds itself in a greater dilemma this time. Reason being, I think that the BOK just got into a position where they're more comfortable cutting rates to give some economic relief, to provide some economic stimulus as the housing prices have started to cool. Nevertheless, if the Korean won is going to face more downward pressures, particularly in fits and starts amidst political uncertainty, the BOK might be somewhat more constrained in its ability to cut rates, just in case they end up exacerbating downside volatility in the Korean won. So the BOK, the direction of travel of policy is more stimulus. They've got scope to cut, and they'll be providing ample liquidity. But these things come at a fairly high cost, and the trade-offs can be sharp if market sentiments are not not holding up, and volatility is accentuated.
And we're keeping a close eye on the business and economic impacts of what we've been seeing transpire here in South Korea. All this uncertainty brought about by that declaration of martial law on Tuesday night. Just to get you up to speed with the latest, I can tell you from our live page at bbc.com, some opposition lawmakers, they are concerned that there will be another attempt to impose martial law, and they're staying close to the National Assembly grounds. That is where we are at the moment. That building behind me, that is the National Assembly, and they're staying close to the grounds here so that they can vote down any such declaration if it happens to be made again. It's something we'll be keeping a close eye here in the hours ahead on BBC News. In the meantime, I'll send you back to Suranjana for more of Business Today.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Well, in other news, Bitcoin has crossed the $100,000 mark for the first time as the election of Donald Trump boosts expectations that his administration will be more friendly towards the cryptocurrency industry. Trump embraced cryptocurrencies during his campaign, promising to make America the crypto capital of the planet and to create a national stockpile of Bitcoin. The BBC's Mariko Oy has more on this. Mariko, I can see that the Bitcoin actually climbed further, has now come down a bit and stabilized around 102,000. Why is this happening?
Well, as you said, the message from the incoming Trump administration appears to be clear, but it's just unthinkable to think that Bitcoin was worth almost nothing only 15 years ago when it started trading. So I'm sure many people will be kicking themselves thinking, I wish I bought it back then. I have to say, though, the price of Bitcoin has always been known to be extremely volatile. So we've witnessed the price going on a roller coaster ride many times over the last decade. But the message and the mood has definitely changed since Donald Trump was elected as the next U.S. president. And this news of the price crossing $100,000, it actually came after Mr. Trump said that he would nominate Paul Atkins as the chair of the country's financial watchdog. And of course, Mr. Atkins previously had spoken favorably towards deregulating cryptocurrencies. And this comes after Gary Gensler, who is the current chair of the Securities Exchange Commission, said that he would step down on day one after Mr. Trump had publicly said that he would fire Mr. Gensler on day one. Of course, Mr. Gensler was known to be a skeptic of the cryptocurrency industry, calling it Wild West. So it was a very clear signal from the incoming administration that the United States would be more friendly towards cryptocurrencies when we saw this price crossing that 100,000. It is interesting, though, that it came many hours after Mr. Trump's announcement that he would nominate Mr. Atkins. But I have to say that Asia is home to some of the largest number of crypto traders in the world, naming South Korea, China and India, just to name a few.
Mariko Oy keeping across that developing story for us. Many thanks. Before we go, some other news. Police in New York are searching for a gunman who shot dead a top medical insurance executive outside a hotel. The attacker lay in wait for Brian Thompson, who was the head of United Healthcare. Investigators say they don't know the motive of the assailant. The attack unfolded in one of the busiest parts of Manhattan, close to the tourist magnets of Times Square and Central Park, in an area where shootings are extremely rare. On the money markets, all three major U.S. stock indexes have closed at fresh record highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500 and NASDAQ were led higher by technology stocks and expectations of lower interest rates. And the maker of Guinness has had to limit the amount that UK pubs can buy in the run-up to Christmas. Diageo says there's been exceptional demand in recent weeks. The firm has been working at 100% production capacity. Guinness has been rising in popularity with women and young people, and the recent rugby internationals have also put a strain on supplies. Do stay with BBC News. There'll be plenty more on our top story. The leader of South Korea's governing party says he will try to convince colleagues to block an impeachment vote against him. The opposition is trying to force Mr. Yoon from office over his botched attempt to impose martial law. And we did just hear that we're not expecting a statement from the president today on Thursday. You'll find plenty more on our website, and do stay with TV for more on that story. That's it for this edition of Business Today.
And I'm Steve Lai in Seoul, where the impeachment process to oust President Yoon is underway, but it may have hit a snag for those opposition parties trying to remove him from office.
Good to have you with us. We've got a very busy programme, so let's get started. I'm Sally Bundock, and we begin in France, where for the first time in more than 60 years, the French government has been brought down by MPs in a vote of no confidence. Michel Barnier will become the shortest-serving Prime Minister in the history of modern France. The vote was decisive. 288 votes were needed to unseat Mr. Barnier. In the end, 331 were cast to remove him. The budget, which was the cause of his downfall, is now defunct. France has been plagued by political uncertainty since the summer election resulted in a hung parliament, a result that can't be changed in an election before next July. In the meantime, President Macron will address the nation this evening. He's also expected to appoint a new Prime Minister quickly, not least because President-elect Trump is due in Paris this weekend for the opening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Our Paris correspondent Andrew Harding reports.
Moments before the voting began here in Paris tonight, Michel Barnier made a final, rather forlorn plea to French MPs. The Prime Minister urged them to back him, his government and his budget, or create chaos.
I can't believe a majority of MPs here will vote to destabilize our institutions at a moment where our country is going through a deep moral, economic, financial and civic crisis.
But the answer came back fast and conclusive.
Pour l'adoption 331.
The Speaker of Parliament revealing that 57% of MPs had voted no confidence in the government. Politicians from the hard right and hard left of French politics briefly uniting on this one issue.
I don't feel my head spinning, and I don't consider this a victory. We had a choice to make, and the choice we made was to protect French people.
Having tasted blood, many French MPs now want more. Specifically, they want President Emmanuel Macron ousted. Heading home from a trip to Saudi Arabia tonight, a badly weakened president has made it clear he's staying put. It is 62 years since France last found itself in a situation like this. On that occasion, President de Gaulle stood his ground and eventually regained control of Parliament. Today feels rather different. France is in debt, public frustration growing, a nation wrestling, like so many now, with the forces of polarisation and populism. I think it's tragic, says this woman, of today's vote. Nobody is considering the consequences. There's a lot of anxiety, this man adds. I'm upset both with the forces on the left and the far right. Tonight, a government has fallen, but France's political deadlock remains firmly in place. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Paris.
So what are the implications of this, where we have the government and top politicians not able to agree on the road ahead for France, in particular the economics? We'll be live to Paris later in this programme to talk to a top economist about the political crisis in France. That still to come. Keir Starmer will set out a plan for change in a speech today in which the Prime Minister will set targets in key areas, including health, the economy and crime, to allow voters to judge the government's performance. Ben Chu from BBC Verify has looked into what we can expect.
The Prime Minister is expected to set out some new measurable milestones today by which voters can judge the performance of this Labour government across a range of areas. We don't know exactly what they all are, but some of Labour's existing pledges give us some clues. First, hospital waiting times. The NHS for England has an official target that 92% of patients waiting for elective treatment should be seen within 18 weeks of being referred. The government is expected to commit to meet this by 2029. In September 2024, only around 59% had been waiting less than 18 weeks. The last time the 92% target was achieved was back in 2015. Second, the economy. The Prime Minister is expected to announce a pledge to boost people's incomes by 2029. The government's official forecaster is projecting a measure called real household disposable income per person will rise by around 0.5% per year over this Parliament, slightly better than in the last Parliament, but that would still be worse than every other Parliament going back for decades. Be aware though that these are only forecasts, and these ones are especially uncertain. They might well prove to be wrong. Third, police. The government is recommitting to the Labour manifesto pledge to deliver 13,000 additional neighbourhood police officers, police community support officers and special constables. A challenge here is the fact that the Police Federation of England and Wales's last survey of its members suggested around a fifth of existing officers were planning to leave the force, with many citing low morale. Fourth, housing. Labour's manifesto pledged to build 1.5 million new homes over the course of the Parliament. That would equate to around 300,000 per year. The most recent official data shows that only 221,000 net additional dwellings were delivered in England in 2023-24, down on the previous year. Many housing experts are sceptical about the feasibility of Labour's target, given the lack of affordability of new housing, which has put off many buyers and deterred developers from building. There are also expected to be targets for clean power and for raising the share of children who are ready for school at the age of 5 by improving access to early years education. Now, of these, it's the targets on clean power, housing and hospital waiting times, which are likely to prove the hardest to meet.
Ben Chu there from BBC Verify, and of course, needless to say, here on BBC News, we'll be across all that as today progresses. Now let's head to South Korea, where the ruling party has said it will not vote to remove the president from office after his failed attempt to bring the country under martial law. The opposition is now trying to convince just enough lawmakers to defect to their side before a vote on Saturday. President Yoon Suk-yeol shocked everyone with his announcement on Tuesday night that caused chaos in the country and was quickly overturned by Parliament. The Defence Minister has taken responsibility for the situation and has resigned, and there has still been no word from the President. Well, let's join my colleague now who is in Seoul for us, Steve Lai. Hello to you, Steve. Tell us more about the latest developments.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Sally. Yeah, you mentioned that President Yoon hasn't spoken. In fact, we haven't heard from him since he lifted that declaration of martial law. From that, he's not expected as well to speak today. Local media have been reporting, citing his press office, that he's not scheduled to make any address. But when he does, we will, of course, be all over it and cover that for you. Now, that's not to say that people aren't speaking. I mean, you might be able to hear them. There are some protesters just outside the National Assembly gates at the front, just across from me here, that have been protesting for most of this morning. There are other rallies as well taking place throughout the day here in Seoul. On different sizes and different scales from different interest groups, though we do expect numbers to increase. It is a working day here in Seoul, so as the evening approaches, we might see and hear more of those as well. There has been some strike action taking place, though, which was something we were looking out for. Workers at Carmaker Hyundai, they're preparing to stage walkouts for 4 hours each on Thursday and on Friday. That's according to local news agency Yonhap. The company has 43,000 strong union, and it's part of the Metalworks Union, which has vowed to launch a full strike on the 11th of December unless the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol does step down. Now, shares of the vehicle manufacturer, they were more than 1.6% down in Seoul this morning as a result of that. Now, there's been a whole lot happening over in the last 24 hours, and here's Laura Bicker, our Asia correspondent, to get you up to speed.
This candlelit cam followed a night of chaos. They gathered on the steps of the parliament with one aim: to call for the impeachment of a president who declared martial law.
Because we have a history of defending democracy a few times, the people will strongly defend democracy once more.
I'm out here as a citizen who could not sit by and watch the democracy breaking down.
Resign, the group chanted, before their Mexican wave. Such a different scene from last night's turmoil. President Yoon plunged his country into martial law. Soldiers broke through the windows of Parliament to prevent elected members from overturning his decree. They were unsuccessful. And after 6 hours, Seoul's parliament, not just its president, were back in control. Today, the building bore the scars of that struggle. Repairs have already begun, as has a motion to impeach the president.
If they're willing to violate human rights under martial law, it's obvious that they're also ready to sacrifice people's lives. Stay alert and fight with us.
Protests sprung up in other parts of the city as South Koreans took a moment to reflect. The prospect of martial law brought back chilling memories of authoritarian rule. In the 1970s and 80s, groups of students in Seoul took on dictators, often clashing with riot police and risking their lives. Their defiance and resilience helped South Korea become a democratic country.
South Koreans value their democracy. They fought for it, some died for it. And although they may be questioning just how robust it may be, they've turned out in their thousands to protect it.
But President Yoon remains in power. Some tried to march to his office, but they were blocked by police. It's unclear whether Mr. Yoon hears their calls to resign. But until he does, these demonstrations, however peaceful, will only grow. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Now, that impeachment vote coming up this Saturday at 7 p.m. Let's bring in Jean McKenzie, our South Korea correspondent, to talk to us more about what we've been seeing transform here or take place here over the last day or so. Jean, this impeachment vote that's upcoming, there's been some developments that mean that it might not lead to the removal of the president.
Yeah, that's because the ruling party, Steve, has come out and said that they are actually going to oppose this impeachment vote. They are not going to try and remove the president from office. And for this vote to go ahead, the opposition party need to get 8 people in the ruling party to vote with them. That means that they would have this supermajority to allow it to happen. But I've been speaking to some of the opposition MPs over the past 24 hours, and honestly, they now don't seem that hopeful that this is going to pass, because they think the ruling party are going to vote in a bloc now and stay loyal. The vote is anonymous, though, and they only need 8 MPs to cross the floor and to vote with them. But, you know, the reason that these MPs do not want to impeach their own president is because if he is impeached, then there has to be elections. And given everything that's happened in the situation right now, I think they know that they probably would not win an election. And not only do they not want to hand power to the opposition leader at the moment, a man called Lee Jae-myung, who would almost certainly then become the president, he is intensely disliked. But, you know, the opposition are saying in counter to that, well, look, if we don't act, then what if the president tries to do this again? You know, he's proven himself to be unpredictable, that he's been willing to do this. One measure they're actually saying they're taking now is that they don't want to leave this building unattended. So the MPs are taking it in turns to make sure they have a constant presence in here in case the president tries to do something like this again. But I think the key question is, if this impeachment vote doesn't go ahead on Saturday, it doesn't remove the president from office, then are the public going to accept this decision? Because we've seen them on the streets over the past couple of days. And if you look back to the last time that South Korea impeached a president back in 2017 with Park Geun-hye, those numbers of protesters just built and built and built until her position was just untenable.
And with that impeachment vote as well, there were MPs from the ruling party that crossed over to vote against the declaration of martial law, but this is a very different situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've spoken to MPs on both sides of the floor about this, and they've said, like, both have said the same, look, it's very different to vote against imposing martial law, which, as we know, most of the ruling party were against, than it is to actually remove your president from office.
Yeah,
that's a different kettle of fish.
And there's been some decent developments as well with the defence minister resigning, his resignation being accepted. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the reporting yesterday that we were getting was that this idea had come from the defence minister, and he has resigned. The president has accepted his resignation, and what he has done, he said he takes responsibility for the chaos that has ensued, but crucially he's not come forward and said actually he was the one that proposed this to the president. So we're still slightly unclear what has happened. But the interesting thing to note here, Steve, is that actually a few months ago, when this defence minister was first appointed, the opposition party raised some of these concerns. They raised the possibility that his appointment was perhaps part of the president's plan to bring in this martial law, because he would need the support of his defence minister to be able to do this. And the defence minister and the president, they are very close. They even went to the same school. And the concern was that Mr. Yoon was surrounding himself with a smaller and ever closer group of allies, and that perhaps this was something he was planning. But the president's office at the time, they dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. So did the defence minister himself. And honestly, most people here did as well. It just seemed too wild and too outlandish to accept.
All right, thanks very much, Jean. We'll have to leave it there. Our Seoul correspondent, Jean McKenzie. Now, earlier I spoke with Moon Chung-in. He served as a special advisor to former President Moon Jae-in, and he was quite a critic of the current president, and he gave me his reaction to the defense minister resigning.
He is a very important part of this martial law conspiracy, but the president should be accountable too, because he alone, the former defense minister Kim Yong-hyun alone, didn't do all these things. The President Yoon Suk-yeol should be accountable to what happened.
So do you think there's a scenario where President Yoon Suk-yeol could remain in office?
Yeah, he was strived to remain office. He'll be making a statement to the Korean people sooner or later, but I think he will make that point very clear, because his argument is first out of anger and frustration, as well as he argues that he declared the martial law in order to eradicate the pro-North Korean anti-state forces. Therefore, he's kind of committed. Therefore, he will try to stay in power. To the extent that people's opposition will be extremely powerful and formidable. Therefore, it's yet to be seen what will happen.
And what do you think this has done for South Korea's reputation on the international stage?
There is two aspects. When he declared the martial law, that was the greatest setback to Korean democracy. And then when the National Assembly, revoked the martial law, then all of a sudden, democratic resilience of South Korea, got the world's spotlight. But the one thing is very clear: down and up. But we are on up. If we can handle this chaos smoothly and wisely, and I think that Korea will be shining democracy in the world.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, there are more rallies expected to take place here across Seoul from other political parties as well as various interest groups as well. Most of them are calling for Yoon's impeachment, though do have to bear in mind as well that there are a few supporting the embattled president. The turnouts are expected to be small in some cases, as it is a working day here in South Korea, but those numbers may grow into the evening. And as Jean McKenzie said, if the impeachment isn't successful, given the level of support for that Yoon has here in South Korea, those protests could continue to grow as the days go on. Around the world and across